Hi everyone, welcome to the Icehouse podcast. Today we have Peter Thomson, who is our Chief Technology Officer at the Icehouse. He's on the Icehouse leadership team, and today's podcast is all about getting to know him better and his responsibilities at the Icehouse. So welcome, Peter. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me along, Bryar. Excited to be here.
Yeah, no worries. And we always start especially our staff interviews with some quick fire questions to help those listening get to know us a little bit better. So first things first, how do you take your coffee?
So I take a flat white, and recently been getting that from Goodness Gracious, which is a little place here in Parnell who don't do the best coffee in the world, but they never do bad coffee. So it's absolutely consistent. So
key.
That's the thing I look out for, is actually a consistent coffee.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. Cool. Morning or night person?
Night person. We've got a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old, so spending a lot of time awake at the moment. But unfortunately, they're night people as well. So we're kind of like leading a double life at the moment.
Yeah, legends. Favorite meal?
I love pizza. And when we lived in New York, there was a little place in Brooklyn called Luzo's, which is a little hole-in-the-wall kind of Italian place, been there for 100 years, and just absolutely amazing. I think the problem is once you have New York pizza, it's very hard to have pizza anywhere else in the world. But that's what I always remember as being a favorite meal.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, well, off the back of that, favorite place in the world, is it New York or is it different?
Yeah, I mean, New York was amazing, but it really is a bit of a concrete jungle. I was actually born in the UK, and we lived in London for a couple of years. And I think what I really loved about London is you've got the big city, you've got the energy, but you can get out to Cornwall and get out to the rest of like the UK and get up to Scotland and even just the travel over to Europe, for example, jumping on a Ryanair flight. So in a way, probably a favourite place is London, but that's because it's really easy to leave and go other places.
I like that answer. That's awesome. That's cool. Okay, when you're not working, how do you like to spend your time?
Well, these days chasing after a toddler, but also really love skiing. So I just love getting up in the mountains. It was something we always used to do as a family. So I kind of remember that time, almost just the fun of being up there and riding the chairlift and having lunch and kind of hanging out as much as the actual physical skiing, but just that whole kind of being out in the mountains that's kind of my happy place.
Yeah, awesome. That's really cool. Middle name?
James.
Nice. I like that. I've had some interesting ones that have sort of taken me off, caught me off guard, but James, that's right down the middle. It's kind of what I expected. And to finish off the quick fire questions, what's the best career advice that you've ever received?
I think for me, it was to look really simply at the opportunities that come up in terms of like new things you can do, and to make sure that you like the craft of what you're doing, so peel away all the artifice and just like, do I like the thing that I'm physically doing? Am I chopping wood or driving a truck or writing code? And to be really honest about what that is. Like, if you're an investment banker, are you going to spend your day kind of doing spreadsheets? So figure out what is the craft, and do you love that? Then imagine being there and then look to the left and the right and see who your colleagues are, and not just the general vibe, but actually who do you physically sit next to? Because they're the people you'll end up seeing every day and going out for coffee with, and they'll be your kind of comrades. And then also look at the place, like, are you outside, are you in an office, what are you doing? So if you get really, really practical, it peels away a lot of the BS around like consulting and digital and blah, and it's just like, do I like what I'm doing? Do I like who I'm doing it with? And do I like where I'm doing it? Because if those things are good, then you'll have good days and bad days and good bosses and bad bosses, but you'll actually love what you're doing. And so I've kind of stuck to that. Cool. And there's been a couple of roles that haven't met that, and it's really obvious when they don't. But that's kind of been a good guide for me.
Yeah, cool. Great answer. And flowing on from that, Would love, diving a little bit deeper now for you to walk us through your career to date and what you did before working at the Icehouse.
Yeah, so I started off as a corporate lawyer working in mergers and acquisitions, and worked on the first IPO, like really, really major retail IPO that had happened in almost a decade, taking the Vector power line kind of company out to the public offering, and I worked on the legals for that.
Wow.
And I was a baby lawyer, but it got me really interested in the process of taking all of the things that we did in like hardcore kind of corporate securities finance law, and then, okay, well, how do we simplify that onto a billboard?
Yeah.
And because, you see those kind of ads and there's a little disclaimer underneath saying kind of capital at risk, kind of subject to the Securities Act, blah, blah, blah. That was my job, was kind of either reviewing those or writing those disclaimers.
Yeah.
And it got me interested in two things. One is like, how do you explain complex financial kind of investment things to the public? And then also, I had been quite focused on this, like law is like a serious profession and I'm going to be a serious kind of lawyer. And I got to know the kind of PR, comms and marketing team that was working at Vector doing the IPO kind of publicity. And they were just like really fun, really kind of cool people, really interesting challenges they were working on in terms of communications. Like I assumed advertising and marketing was all just like toothpaste tubes and kind of fluffy kind of creative ads, but they were actually like really thinking strategically about the business and working at a senior level and all of those sorts of things. So it kind of gave me a bit of a hint that there might be more to life than just being a lawyer. So I kept on working at Russell McVeigh, so it's a reasonably major law firm, did some other kind of DD work on different deals, but at some point got the chance to join the Better by Design team at New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. So that was in the really early days of design thinking as a kind of approach to business problem solving and new product development. And I think what they were looking for at NZTE was people that were interested in design or passionate about kind of the way that you use the mindset of a designer to think about business problems, but that could also sympathize with a fair amount of cynicism towards that whole kind of world. And so I had that background as a lawyer, but then also an interest in kind of comms and communication. And so got the chance to be in at the ground floor when the Better by Design program was getting started, and helped partially kind of craft the program, but also just get out and meet a lot of kind of Kiwi businesses that were like, some of them quite conservative manufacturing businesses, but were looking at the challenge of how do they become more customer centered. So did that for a couple of years, and that was a really great grounding in how hard it is. Even if we had a free program, government funding, we had like funding to go on top of that to add to projects and things, and we still couldn't get people to say yes to some of this because they were just that it was new, it was disruptive. Bringing on kind of external advisors to help a business was a challenge for people. But I got to know one of the teams that was doing the actual like design thinking consultancy work. So it was Brian Richards and the BRR team, and kind of fell in love with the branding and storytelling part of design. So that's not just the logos, it's also like, how do you actually get to that core kind of purpose, that mantra, that why for a business, and then how do you communicate that? So I got into that brand strategy consulting work with Brian and the team, did that for a couple of years. And then eventually we were like, okay, well, we've got to go and do an OE. Most of the people that I knew that had been really successful in their careers had spent time overseas and had that like diverse viewpoint. And we were kind of ready to go. And I think I'd already given notice at BRR, and then the global financial crisis happened. And so it wasn't a great time to be arriving in London. When I think the BBC had laid off kind of 10,000 people, the banks were all laying people off, the ad agencies were all cutting hard. So it was not a great time to turn up in a new city in a competitive market and say, hey, why don't you do some brand strategy and talk about the meaning of life when your entire business is kind of on the line? So I had some advice from someone who said, tell them when you arrive that you know how to use Facebook.
Yeah.
Someone will give you a job in social media, because it was in those early days of digital, social, what we now call kind of content and community. None of that really existed. So I traipsed around London, and I assumed all marketing was just kind of marketing, because in New Zealand you had branding and advertising agencies, and that was kind of about it. But in London, it's a very, siloed sounds bad, but they're very specialized disciplines. So I went and talked to ad agencies and said, I want to do social media and digital. And they were like, oh, okay, well, so that must mean social media advertising. So you want to do Facebook ads, Google ads, and can you help us with that? And I was like, yeah, okay, that's interesting. That's kind of part of what I see as being social and digital. But the ad agencies just wanted to do ads. And then went and talked to the design firms, because obviously had some connections from working in design. But the design firms all looked at social and digital and just wanted to do landing pages, brochure websites, and little micro sites, like kind of Instagram style stuff. So they all wanted to do digital design because they were design firms. And then by coincidence, I had a recruiter that sent me off to go and talk to some PR agencies. And I was like, there is no way I'm going to work in PR. Like, this is not like a profession that, I mean, I had some exposure to through the vector thing, but it like just wasn't on my frame that I would get into that industry. But it turns out that in London in particular, the PR agencies are really what we would call in New Zealand an integrated communications agency. So they're like full stack comms agencies that were doing interesting things around, like, and this is the early days of social. So this is like blogger relations, community relations, managing online forums for like games companies, managing the actual organic social media accounts. So people giving customer feedback, and that just felt like it had much more honesty and integrity for me. So I ended up spending about 4 or 5 years in the UK working in digital PR, and so worked for everyone from like Toshiba launching new laptops to launched a couple of new kind of travel cameras for Panasonic. Did some kind of games PR for different kind of games companies. But in the course of doing that, I got to know the kind of technology scene in the UK a little bit better. And it was in the early days of what they wanted to be the UK version of Silicon Valley. So it was called Silicon Roundabout. So it's the Old Street Roundabout in Shoreditch. It's kind of East London, kind of a hipster neighbourhood. But there was some cheap office space, and there was a bit of a emerging kind of movement around like startups coming out of London, coming out of the UK. And there was a bit of a scene building up there. So I got to know some of the angel investors, got to know some of the incubators, and eventually got the chance to go in and work with an innovation centre called the Innovation Warehouse. And they had an angel network, accelerator program, and a co-working space.
Wow, that's
and
cool.
some training programs that they were running as well. So not entirely unlike the Icehouse.
Yeah, I was like, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, it does sound familiar, funnily enough. But Innovation Warehouse were a really great team. They hadn't done a lot of marketing and branding, so we got to create a new logo, create new kind of digital presence for them, really kind of take it to market. But it also got me more and more interested in some of the individual startups, and that's where my career kind of really changed. I got to know the team at Cedars, who were an online investment platform. And it was just one of those things where suddenly I'd had this career where I'd bounced around kind of law and design and some of the marketing things, and it all felt like it was a little bit jumbled. And then I walked into working with an online investment platform, and suddenly it was like, oh, okay, well, because we're doing equity crowdfunding or online investment, you need to understand the legals. We need to be able to actually build a product and kind of take that to market, and we need to be able to tell the story and communicate it really well. So that worked there for a couple of years, and then by coincidence won the green card lottery.
Yes.
So ended up taking the chance to move to New York, and funnily enough, equity crowdfunding had just been legalized there. So it had been legalized 2 or 3 years earlier in the UK. So I'd gotten to like work with the CEDAS team from when we were about kind of 10 people, grew that to like about 50 people by the time I left. And like really just absolutely business was accelerating and growing, and then joined the Seed Invest team in New York. So that was a second like online investment platform, a little bit more venture capital focused because of the way the US kind of market works, but again, responsible for marketing, but with a decent element of product design, product development. And then after a couple of years in New York, we're just starting to feel like we'd been away from home for too long and missing family and thinking about kind of a family ourselves and things. So took the chance to move back to New Zealand and met up with the team at Snowball Effect, which is a third online investment platform.
and here we go again.
Gabrielle said to me, "No, you can't make this is like you can't keep doing startups, particularly the same startup, but in a different jurisdiction." But the Snowball team, again, slightly different New Zealand take on that whole issue of how do you actually effectively do a mini IPO, and in the New Zealand market, it suits. Rather than technology startups and kind of angel investing, it actually suits more like breweries and so worked with Zephyr Cider to do a mini IPO, kind of allowing people to buy shares in the cider business, with Reefton Distilling, which is a whiskey distillery in the South Island, and again getting the local community to become shareholders in that business is actually a really cool kind of use of the technology. So worked for Snowball for a little while, and then we had our new baby, Isabel. So she arrived, and so kind of thought, right, it's time to get serious. I'll go and get a corporate job. So I went to work for the Clemenger Group, in particular, a market research and digital analytics business called Perceptive. And I was like, okay, I'm going to put on a suit. This is now a kind of good, serious corporate career. I've done all the startup stuff. I'm ready to actually kind of, be an adult. And I'd taken it because it was going to be more safe, stable, and secure. But after about, what were we? Maybe 6 months, the teams were restructured. There'd been an acquisition, and some of the work that we were doing in terms of analytics and digital was consolidated back to Australia. And so I ended up getting made redundant.
Funny.
And so
not funny, but it's funny how it works out though.
And it was an amazing agency. They're doing really great work. They've actually since expanded, moved around a couple of the teams and things. And for the right scale of client, that type of agency can be really transformative because they can deploy like really massive kind of resource onto a project. So it was a cool thing to be part of. Loved the team, still in touch with quite a lot of them. But it was one of those kind of unhappy coincidences because within a matter of like weeks, I'd seen a LinkedIn post from Andy Hamilton. And Andy had said, "Oh, we're thinking of expanding our kind of digital presence," and ended up reaching out, and here we are.
Yeah, pretty cool. And so following from that, well, first of all, that's an amazing, I just love all the ebbs and flows and the experience in so many areas, and me getting to work with you, Peter, you can definitely tell, you've got your experience in marketing and advertising and you're thinking that way. And lots of different angles that you can think from because of the experience that you've had in the past. So it's really cool to hear that. So following from that, what is your role at the Icehouse as Chief Technology Officer?
So that's it's been really interesting to kind of take all of that kind of international experience, all of those diverse backgrounds, and bring it back into actually something fairly straightforward and simple at the Icehouse. So I'm responsible for new product development and digital products and services, and in particular around everything that we're doing with technology. So that's particularly creation of new services, any of the things that we're doing to kind of digitize what we're already doing or bringing new products on stream, and then also just making sure that all of the things that we're doing in terms of technology is safe, secure, and kind of working for everyone. So a general kind of CTO role, which has been interesting for me coming from such a diverse background, but luckily enough we've got a really good team, really good support, so I've been able to kind of pick that up and drive some of what we're doing forwards, which has been good because we've got a lot of new things that we're working on, which is really cool.
Totally. And so you're split in the Icehouse and Icehouse Ventures, so cover both worlds, which really explains, your background in startup world too. So that's really cool mix there, which is great. Awesome. So you first heard of the Icehouse when did you first hear of the Icehouse in general? So I know you saw Andy Hamilton's post and that's how you ended up in the seat, but when did you first hear of the Icehouse? And and what drew you to the role?
Yep. So, funny enough, I first heard of the Icehouse about 15 years ago when I was doing finishing up my law degree, and you have to do a pro bono volunteer internship with an organisation.
Yeah.
And I had a friend, Paul Adams, who was working at the Icehouse at the time, and I knew Paul through law school, funnily enough, and Paul got me in, and so the Icehouse was downstairs at the time in the textile loft. It was Paul, Andy, probably Raywin, possibly Liz was either about to start or had just started. And so I took a kind of summer internship, sat in the corner and did research into funding methods. So we were like, because it was the early days of being a non-profit. So we're like, well, should we get sponsorship from Rotary or from churches or from the Lotto Foundation, or what should we do? Where can we get some money from? So I kind of did a research project, but it exposed me early on to some of the thinking in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship, which again, I've been quite cynical about, but it kind of helped, that experience really helped plant the seed in terms of knowing that there was an ecosystem here in New Zealand. It wasn't super high profile at the time, but you could tell that there was some building momentum around kind of innovation and entrepreneurship in New Zealand, which was really exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. Man, such a funny perspective it must be to, be having been in that seat as an intern and then coming into this more of a leadership role in the technology space and seeing how far the organization has grown in that time. How was that? Like, how was that?
It's just a completely different business now in some regards because of the scale, but actually the fundamentals in terms of the focus have been really consistent over that time. I think Liz talks a lot about being purpose-driven and purpose-led, and I think that stayed true. But I think the other thing too is the real focus from the early days on the education and training and development work that we do with SMEs, that really thinking about like, okay, well, what would an MBA level program look like for business owners who are allergic to kind of academic kind of guff, but actually really need help to get their businesses kind of focused and delivering and maybe even their own leadership style and things. And that's kind of stayed true. And all of the things around that have kind of grown, but that seed crystal is still there. And then the original insight around like, how do we discover and invest in the best startups coming out of New Zealand and really turn them into a rocket ship? And the method by which we've done that has changed. So that's incubators, accelerators in the early days, the angel network, and then even the work that we're doing now, kind of leaving that behind and actually focusing much more on funds, managed funds, like much more venture capital style. Again, the method by which we do things might have changed, but that fundamental purpose, but also the fundamental audience, the fundamental problems we're trying to address, those have been consistent. So honestly, it's actually just felt like coming home.
Yeah, man, that's so really cool to hear. That's really awesome. Okay, well, with that, what is your favorite aspect of your role?
I think for me, while I love the larger context, I think for me, actually, personally, one of the reasons I've made the switch into focusing purely on technology these days is that I've discovered over the course of my career that I actually love building things.
Yeah.
So that was always something when I worked on like these communications or campaigns or digital projects and things. It was always a sense of satisfaction of like, oh, okay, we've built this website, we're now launching it. The adrenaline buzz of like that all-nighter the night before it launches, the sense of actually shipping something and then seeing people use it, because in a lot of kind of marketing, you kind of throw stuff out there and you don't really know if it's working or not, or like I love with like actual product development when you're building, particularly if I've been coding or even just like done the specifications and worked on the user journeys and the scope for something, but just seeing things come to life, because you can then look back, like I can go home at the end of the day and say, there was something that didn't exist.
Yeah.
And I arrived, did something, and now something exists in the world that didn't before. And honestly, that just somehow suits my personality. I find that really rewarding. I put probably too much of my kind of attention and love and kind of ego even into like making sure that whatever we're creating and whatever I'm associated with is really amazing. Like I think it's got to be high quality to be worth doing, but it's just so rewarding to see something come to life that you kind of, it's worth it.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I love that. What a great answer. That's great. Cool. So from there, what excites you most about the opportunities in technology at the Icehouse and our digital transformation projects?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. So I think the way that we have started to use data as part of what we're doing is really interesting, because we're moving from very much of a kind of one-touch interaction, both on the growth side of the business, we would have a training program, but then, I mean, in theory, there was a life cycle kind of journey, but we were really managing that in a data-driven way, setting reminders, bringing people in and creating a kind of interactive or holistic experience. And likewise for investors, we were bringing an investor in, they might have a transaction, we'd do some basic reporting, but it wasn't really a kind of whole of life and relationship. And even for startups, actually, we can now invest into them further along. And I think that's a trend, that's a change that's happening for our clients, but it's really interesting for us as well, is moving from one-time transactions into a much more kind of long-term relationship. And then the role that technology can play in that, in terms of actually providing, and I think this is a massive change that we're going to see in like across a lot of industries, is moving from just single shop kind of e-commerce, like just get in, make a transaction, get out again. That's actually fairly straightforward these days, and it's kind of table stakes. But if you look at like, I don't know, a builder or a plumber, like we're getting to a point now where people kind of expect, they expect to be able to send you an email or like do an inquiry through your website. That's not actually going to give you an advantage anymore. Whereas if you can actually provide a dashboard or a place for people to come back to, or something that allows them to actually solve a problem that they're having on an ongoing basis, then you have this switch from a transaction into a relationship. And so that's something we're spending a lot of time on at the Icehouse. And I think I'm finding there's so much that we've already done, and there's so much more that we can do in that space too.
Yeah, it's cool. And I love that all of our transformation projects are so people driven. We're wanting to add value to people's journeys, and because these people are busy, business owners, that they've got a lot going on and they're making some awesome impact in their worlds and communities, it's important that we bring that value to them in a really succinct, easy way, that makes it easy for them. So it's cool that people sort of come back to that's the heart of it, which is great.
I think just to add to that, the other thing too is that historically, a lot of what we've done has involved kind of peer-to-peer, like small group sessions or kind of peer sharing and things. But like, while that happens on program or in the room, like we haven't always had ways to facilitate that digitally or to encourage those peer-to-peer connections. And I think whether it's through social media, through the community and events that we're running, or some of the kind of digital tools that we're bringing online. I mean, you and I have worked together a lot on Icehouse Central, for example.
Totally.
And it's just so rewarding to see the business owners talking to each other. So we've created an environment, but they're actually having a conversation. And we're seeing the same thing on the investment side as well when we run talent events, where we've got kind of people networking with each other in terms of sourcing talent, or investors getting to know each other better and things through different channels. Like those, like there's a real role for the Icehouse. I think a lot of businesses could do this more, is to have the confidence to say, okay, it's not just, we've moved from one time into a relationship, but also it's not just a relationship of us to you, kind of one to many. It's actually a many-to-many peer group, a community. People have a shared problem or shared interest that we as a business have identified a group of people, and that we have the confidence to get out of the way sometimes and actually let them talk.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a buzz seeing, you know, other business owners connect together, do business together, chat on something that we've created just for that purpose. You know, it really is a buzz. So totally agree. Awesome. This is an interesting one. I probably chucked this in here because I was really interested to know. But what is the most challenging part of your role?
Yeah, well, this morning I was helping Darylyn fix the Wi-Fi because she couldn't connect to the network. So I have a small part of my role because I'm responsible for technology across the entire business. That while I don't do help desk, sometimes people come and tap me on the shoulder because it's easier than logging a ticket with our outsourced help desk. So but it speaks to a larger thing, which is that a lot of technology is actually personal, or it's like there's a saying, there's an acronym they use in IT, which is like PIBKS or something, and it stands for problem exists between keyboard and seat. As in the user has just like not understood what's going on, and I think that's part of what I like struggle with in the role, but also think is really interesting about technology is a lot of what looks like a technology issue. Like we're in the process of moving to Microsoft Teams and rolling out OneDrive, moving away from a kind of file server. Like the amount of training and conversations and like politics around like, okay, who's storing what folders and which files and which folder, and someone else is like saves things in a certain way, and someone else doesn't want to touch these old folders because they want to refer back to them, but someone else wants them really tidy. It's all personalities. So there's a lot of kind of managing the personal reality. And I think the other part of that, which actually goes back to product development with our customers as well, which is the difference between what people say and what they actually do. Yeah, and
we've had good chats about this.
Yeah, and you can't get away from that in the work that I do, because if people tell you, oh, okay, well, I really want to download a tax statement for my investments, and then we spend months building that and then no one uses it, we have a problem. And likewise, if we interview a bunch of people and they say, oh, I'd really love an online website where I can connect with other business owners, and then we build one and no one turns up, we're going to know about it, and it is not good. So I spend a lot of time thinking about two things. One is like, what will people do, either based on what they say or what we can observe in other places and transfer that over, and or what is the way that we can test something in the fastest, most efficient way so that we can observe real behavior. Because there's such a delta between if you interview people about what TV they watch, then they would tell you they watch the news and documentaries, and then you put a set-top recorder box on top of their TV, and they watch sports and reality TV and daytime soap operas. Like the difference between, and sometimes I think it's not even that I don't think people are necessarily lying.
No.
Like they just don't realize, like your phone now has this thing called screen time, which will tell you how much time you're spending on things. The amount of time we all spend on doing fairly mindless kind of social media stuff and things like that. Like, I'm not sure people know consciously what they're actually spending their time on or what they're doing. So I'm always interested in that. What's the difference between what people say they'll do, what do they actually do, and then how do we actually account for that in our product development? Some of that is a real challenge, to be honest. But that's kind of, it's interesting, it's worthwhile, but it's not easy.
That's a great answer. And even going back to the whole team stuff around, moving to teams and having to communicate that across to the team, I think it's important to talk about, because there will be so many business owners that have to go through that and work out what works best for their team. And processes and all that sort of stuff. And then, around what people say versus what they do. Man, that's interesting. And I remember when you told me that, and I was just like, it's so true, because it's a bit of a tension and you've just got to work out the sweet spot. So great answer. That's cool. Awesome. Next one here is, what is a piece of advice you'd give a business owner looking to improve their technology and take part in digital transformation?
So I think one of the things that businesses don't quite realize how important it is their CRM.
Yeah.
So that's your customer relationship management system, but really it's your central kind of data platform. And I think there's been a real transition that people haven't necessarily woken up to yet, is that modern CRMs are actually an index of your customers, and that should be able to sync and talk and communicate and even automate in a really seamless two-way system with everything. So and because people are actually expecting that. So if I call up a power company, and when I expect them, based on my phone number, to know who I am, rather than me having to re-explain it 10 times. I expect them to have a dashboard at their end that says, okay, this is my power account, this is my average usage. I expect if I unsubscribe from marketing emails that they actually stop sending them to me. They don't just like randomly re-upload a CSV to MailChimp each time and send a new email. I expect that if I log on to a digital platform and see their website, that also knows who I am and that it has up-to-date information. And none of that can work without a decent CRM, or at least a central data repository for customer data. So rather than I think about a lot of people see their CRM as just the surface layer that the sales team interacts with. Whereas I would really challenge businesses, and I know we're going through this journey at the Icehouse using Salesforce and HubSpot, to think of your CRM as a central customer data platform, and to really put the time in to make that awesome, because it does seep through kind of every touch point.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It really is. Awesome. And in your opinion, what is your opinion on the future landscape in a COVID world for SME businesses? Because interesting, because it's had a real effect on digital, and and how they said, I can't remember the exact stats, so don't quote me, but in terms of like COVID sped up business practices and where we were going digitally by 7 years, 10 years, or whatever it was. Any thoughts from you on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a crazy time. I look back on it now in terms of the hours we pulled and the work we did in the early days of some of getting people connected remotely and continuing to build product and accelerate some of the digital work. We brought an entire new program to market within a matter of months, when historically that might have taken years, and actually also delivered it fully remote. But I think the thing that really made a change in the business landscape was that some of the obvious stuff like websites and e-commerce and things like that, but the thing that was a bit more subtle for me was actually click and collect. And I don't mean the actual click and collect process itself, but it's the fact that there's a mix of online and offline.
Yeah.
So at different points in level 2 and level 3, level 4, everything was closed. But level 2 and level 3, there was a fair amount of, okay, well, I will make the order and pay online, and then I'll go and collect from the cafe, or e-commerce like Mitre 10, Bunnings. You could really tell the differences in terms of how those businesses adapted and how smoothly they could kind of switch on e-commerce and click and collect. And because that challenges you to have your point of sale, your online ordering, your in-team, your fulfillment, your logistics, everything has to kind of line up for click and collect to work. But it's really interesting as something that will carry forward. It's not necessarily the click and collect behavior, but it's the people are expecting to be able to interact with businesses in a way that suits them. So if I want to place an order for a coffee before I go, because I know I'm in a hurry and I'll walk down and get the coffee, but I want it made before I arrive, I can still use the click and collect kind of app. They've still got the system set up. I might be the only person using it, but it's still there. And we've seen examples of where we've got stuff with, getting things for a toddler. If you need kind of more nappies in the middle of the night, we've switched to doing kind of online grocery delivery. Like I haven't been to the supermarket in a year.
Wow.
And
Of
I
course,
don't think I may never go back. I may never go back into a supermarket.
Yeah.
Because that online ordering has become kind of a habit now.
Yeah.
And then I'm getting to a point where with like baby clothing, for example, like we know her sizes, we know what we need. It's actually more convenient to do click and collect, pick something up on the way home than having to go in and wander around the store.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see more and more of that across businesses, is that people are expecting to be able to interact with the business in a way that suits them, whatever that means. But it's really putting a strain on a lot of businesses, because you can't just say, oh, well, we only accept orders in this one way, because there'll be someone standing next to you that is like, well, we've got an app, we've got online, we've got also SMS, we've got blah. So being multi-channel and allowing people to kind of choose their own way through, I think is probably some of the future of this customer experience stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great answer. Cool. Is there anything you took or learnt from 2020 that you have found you've taken into 2021? It could be, from a work perspective, just anything that you've taken into this year.
Well, I think a work and personal one is like the working remotely thing.
Yeah.
But I think we already knew that, because particularly in software development, you know at the end of the day you've done work. Because you can literally look at the number of code, like lines of code that you've written, and go, okay, I did work. So that's not in question.
Yeah.
But what is subtle is not just remote, but also asynchronous.
Yeah.
So, asynchronous. So rather than like in the early days of lockdown, we spent a huge amount of time on Zoom to kind of stay connected. But what I found is that forced synchronicity didn't actually suit everyone. So one of the developers that worked on the Icehouse Ventures investor portal, he and I have never met. And we've worked together for like a year now, and he's done amazing work. We've got a really good relationship. But, and this is the key thing, not only have we never met, we've spoken on the phone once. We had one Skype call when we started the project. And now he's in Auckland. Like, it's not like he's in Dubai or in a different country. It's just like, but the trick is, he likes to work at a time that suits him. So I can actually see from some of his code commits, like he's working between like midnight and 3 a.m. on some of what we're doing. But I don't care, because I just tag him in a Trello card that says, hey, we're working on a new visualization. He picks it up when it suits him, works on it when it suits him, and then he just tags me when it's done.
Yeah.
And so no email.
Done. Yeah.
No email, no calls, no need to have meetings and things. It just, now that's a very particular type of relationship. But I think the thing that I'm taking into 2021 and beyond in terms of like remote work is actually being willing to hand the baton over and trust the other person to do their part, and then come back when they're ready, rather than saying, hey, can we please have a 1 hour Zoom call and we'll sit and we'll talk about this and we'll talk about the meaning of life, because, well, that synchronization is really important in person. I'm not sure that it adds as much value when you're remote. So I'm switching a little bit more to not just remote, but also time shifted. Now, it's selfish as well with young kids. I can sneak in a decent amount of work from when the girls go to sleep at like 5 or 6 or 7. And actually that's some of my most productive work time, because the house is quiet and everyone's relaxed and the day's kind of done, and I can actually sit and get work done. And if that suits me, or it suits someone else, if someone else, Liz in our team, for example, is an early riser, if she wants to get up at 6 in the morning, or God knows when she gets up, and absolutely crank before I'm even awake, then absolutely more power to her. But we've got to find a way to be able to kind of pass the baton really seamlessly.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's such a big element of trust, businesses trusting their employees and employees knowing that they need to be trusted. And I think in the most part, it worked, it just worked, and productivity in many cases actually went up because of that, finding the times that work for you and, working in with your business to make sure that works. But it's great. So it's awesome. Good answer. Cool. Well, I thought we're nearing the end, and I've really, really enjoyed this podcast. Like seriously insightful. But let's have a bit of a fun finish. What is an interesting fact that not many people know about you? I feel like you've got lots.
Yeah. So one of them would be that, as well as just loving skiing kind of as a hobby, that I actually trained as a ski instructor. So in the early days of being a baby lawyer, I was moonlighting on the weekends, driving down to Whakapapa, and to haze the kind of new instructors, when you're newly qualified, they put you in the kiddies ski school.
Yeah.
So I didn't have kids at the time, and it possibly put me off for a while. But it's absolutely amazing, like the amount of joy that like a 4 or 5 year old just gets from like throwing snowballs and playing around and
so cool.
skiing and things. But it's really rediscovered my love of the sport as well, because the discipline and the precision that you learn as an instructor, like you really learn to like be intentional about the way that you ski and the way that you move and all of those sorts of things. I used to do competitive dancing, so a style of dance called Sarok, and
I didn't know that. Wow, that's cool.
Yep.
Wow.
And swing dance as well, when that was popular in the early 90s. But being a ski instructor was really similar. Like you learn about how to move your hand, how to kind of control your core, how to move your feet in a really kind of intentional way. And when you're skiing and it really is flowing and it feels like dancing or like surfing, or it's like, it really is like a beautiful feeling. So I think that's something that, it's always kind of stuck with me too, is like not just a love of the sport, but a love of doing it really, really well.
That's cool. Those are great facts. That's great. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for being on the podcast. And I hope those listening have enjoyed tuning in and learning more about what Peter does at the Icehouse, and some real gold that could actually be implemented into, our business owners that are listening, their businesses, and what they can do and what they can think more about. So thank you. Appreciate your time.
Cool. Likewise. Great to talk.